Good morning, folks. Welcome. We'll get going just a second here as we get folks woven into the meeting. And Samanish, if you want to go see if there's anybody in the attendees that needs to get bumped up, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think I see Matt in there.
Okay. All right, folks. Well, I think we're getting everybody woven in here. I'm just sending out some links for people who didn't get it. And should be. Hold on a second. Okay. So welcome. It's a checkup call, a check-in call of the Advisory Committee of Maine's Offshore Wind Roadmap. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Thanks for those who are attending as well as participants. We have an hour call scheduled. We may finish earlier, which is fine. And I will turn it over to Director Dan Burgess, your co-chair, to kick us off.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining for this quick update call. Happy New Year. Hope everyone's having a good start to 2023. I'm without co-chair Admiral Johnson today, so I'm missing his remarks of inspiration, and but he does send his regrets and regards to everyone. I think today our goal is really to share where we are in the process of finalizing the roadmap and provide an opportunity to, update you all on changes made and comments received. We met last December at the university, which felt like I think to some, the close to final meeting, but we did want to offer this opportunity for some final changes as well as for the public comments to come in. And so we're going to go through those today. As far as where the document is, the actual roadmap itself, we're pretty close to pens down on all the content, but and are kind of in the getting our designers working on making it an attractive looking document, but wanted to provide you all with kind of what we've heard, what we discussed, and how we've addressed it. Before we jump into that, I do want to just say how grateful we are for all of the work that everyone has put into this, and that folks have stayed at the table, and that we've been able to work well together and on this topic. I'd asked Stephanie beforehand when our first meeting of the offshore wind roadmap was, and curious if anyone has any guesses of or remembers when that was.
I do.
I couldn't remember, so Stephanie, it was July 14th, 2021. So we've been at this for a while, and just really, again, appreciate all the time that everyone's put into this. We want to go to the slides next. So we did want to provide update on, as we have done at these, of what's happening outside of the roadmap process or in parallel to the roadmap process. So the BOEM has announced next steps in the commercial leasing process for the Gulf of Maine. As you know, they've targeted a lease sale for the third quarter of 2024. They have released a draft call for information, which is on their website, and are now in the process of hosting in-person and virtual information sharing meetings in the region over the next 2 weeks. They were in Massachusetts yesterday, Portsmouth today, and then they'll be in Portland tomorrow. Hopefully everyone here has that information. We did send are sending an update via our newsletter to everyone to make sure that they have the details about that meeting and how to participate. Tomorrow's at the Holiday Inn in Portland from 5 to 8, and these are really information exchange meetings, really. But the next Gulf of Maine task force hasn't been scheduled, but is tentatively planned for spring 2023. So that's what's happening this week and ongoing. Where we have not, there's not a decision or anything announced on the request for competitive interest. We're anticipating that this quarter. And you may have seen that current bone director Amanda Lefton is stepping down, and then a new director has been announced. Her name is Elizabeth Klein. So just want to make sure that folks were aware of that. And there's a little bit of news last week with BOEM publishing or announcing proposed rules aimed at improving the process for leasing offshore wind, and did want to make sure folks were aware of that. Next slide, or do I have one more slide, or just this one, David?
I think that's it. And I'm happy to sort of jump in from here if you want me to.
Yeah, I would note that we're this Maine is one of the 9 states that released a state regional fisheries compensation fund framework, request for information with comments due at the end of the month. Still a lot of things to work through, but the 9 states are working together on that and are seeking comment. And then finally, I would note, as we talked about last time, we're excited about the clean energy partnership grants that are moving forward, and particularly those related to offshore wind, to the university, to the iron workers, and others for additional offshore wind training. And then I don't know if Matt Prinz was able to jump on, if you want to provide a quick update on the port work.
Yeah, sure. No problem, Dan. So I really have 2 updates. Well, good morning, everybody. First off, I didn't get to say that, but yeah, I have 2 real updates. One is the Maine DOT has entered into a contract with Moffitt and Nichol to do more preliminary engineering work for the alternative study for an offshore wind facility. So that work that just recently was contracted will target Mac Point and provide the necessary data to support and provide information for the alternatives analysis that we've been talking about with the Offshore Wind Port Advisory Group. So there'll be more information coming there. And then also the next meeting for the Offshore Wind Port Advisory Group is in the works. We're targeting like a mid-March timeframe. And there's no word that's gone out yet to the members of that group or the public, but we should be having an announcement here at some point soon, just kind of finalizing agendas and trying to make sure that we have a full agenda to discuss with the group that day. So anyway, stay tuned for more information on that. Otherwise, we're just continuing on with the work that we've been doing really for the last year, collecting data, preliminary engineering, and exploration into the permitting process for an offshore wind facility. So a lot of work, a lot of moving parts, but it's going well, and we're making good progress there. So anyway, that's all I really have for an update. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dan. As you can see on the screen, this is what we're trying to do today in the call, and Dan mentioned this as well. So this is what we'll be doing today. If you remember this graphic, we are right at the end here. We are almost ready to communicate that roadmap and get it out, and we're finalizing it. As Dan said, it's basically pens down on the content, and it's more about formatting and other things now. And so we're going to spend the first half hour reviewing what those comments were, both what came in public comment and also doing a summary of what you all said. Again, we sent this out as some draft materials, and we'll post these online. If they're not up there already, we'll make sure they get online. But the summary of what you said in your December meeting, a summary of the 80+ comments that came in as that comment period we had in December and into early January, and then and what that's all meant in terms of some revisions to those documents that were sent around and you all reviewed. So that's what we're going to start with, talk about some next steps. I think a moment of gratitude, we'll figure out how that goes. But basically, this is the last scheduled encounter we have with this advisory committee. So we wanted to create a space for thanking you and thanking each other. All right. So let me turn it over to Laura, who's going to walk us through some key points of feedback. And then Stephanie, who will walk us through what that's meant for changes in the draft documents. or near final documents at this point. Laura, take it away.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you, and Happy New Year. So I just have 3 slides to share. I think you all should have in that packet more detail than what's going to be on these slides. But overall, from our December meeting, which, as you recall, was up in Orono, we went through a lot of material. And the key points of feedback were really wanting to get more specificity around the milestones and the timelines. If you recall, we had particularly a conversation around that with ports and procurement. You also provided feedback around what are the next steps in terms of environment and wildlife, what kind of forum for continued dialogue, and also related to environment and wildlife and fisheries. Really wanted to make sure that those objectives were held up high as the other objectives, and those recommendations were seen as really critical to de-risking projects. So that was some of the feedback there. That the roadmap really include implementation and how we're maintaining momentum. And there was a comment from someone in the advisory committee about making sure that all of us community-wide are helping in maintaining that momentum as the roadmap is rolled out. Also, feedback about enhancing language in terms of labor, and including some more specific examples of how that's used and how labor is part of and parcel of a partner in this process. And then finally, also a conversation that you all had about, are there ways to signal opportunities to de-risk development, especially through transmission and landing sites? And could there be language added to the roadmap to enhance some of those pieces? So Stephanie's going to talk a little bit more about how those were incorporated. So let me go to the next slide and just share. So from the public comments, we had about 80 comments submitted in, I think we had about 3 or 4 weeks that the website was opened. So if you recall, the public only saw the objectives, strategies, and actions. So like the milestones documents and a couple of the things that you all had seen as advisory committee members were not up there. So we really wanted them to focus on the nuts and bolts. In general, many people really did express support for the roadmap and the work that was done, and really seeing this as an opportunity for Maine. Also, people really did stress the importance of protecting wildlife and environment on that road, and especially existing ocean users in the process. So there was a optimistic and caution on both sides. Others also had some strong concerns around especially the livelihoods of fishermen and impacts of right whales. So there was a mix of feedback, but more generally on the positive side. That's in the general. And then there were, if we go to the next slide, this is just some of the specific points of feedback. We have broken it down by objective. So there were specific feedback for each of the objectives. In general, there are strong support for certain aspects. The idea of the regional collaboration, the research consortium, there was particular support for the fisheries working group siting recommendation and bringing that forward. Port infrastructure and procurement plans were seen as really important, as well as transmission planning. Really, many people saw that as key to next steps for the roadmap. Some would prefer other forms of renewable energy. So there were specific suggestions around tidal or wave or other ways of distributed solar. Questioning is offshore wind the right path for renewables? And then there were several concerns around Sears Island as a potential port facility, and encouraging to explore really fully Mac Point. So there were several people that brought forward their concerns around that particular process. Next slide. So again, it was interesting. The public also sort of wanted to see more specific milestones. And
these are the revisions, actually, Laura.
Sorry. So now we get to go to Stephanie. I was looking at that going, I thought I said that. So Stephanie, I think we'll turn over to you, but before we do that, and an early gratitude, just in case I forget at the end, I've really enjoyed working with you all, and I can't believe this is perhaps our final meeting and tag teaming with David here. So really appreciate the efforts, not only this group, but really all the working groups that brought forward so much good information from which to craft this roadmap. So Stephanie, do you want to talk about all the changes that and tweaks that were made in response to those comments?
Sure. Yeah, glad to do that. And Happy New Year, everyone. I can't believe it's already January 18th. But again, really to echo what Laura has been saying, really appreciate all this time that you have spent with us, and really enjoyed this process. So in terms of the key revisions to the document, the writing team has been working really hard with responsive revisions to the helpful comments from the advisory committee and the feedback from the public and the website. We'd just like to highlight a couple of the key revisions that we made in these next few slides. And I'll just walk through some of the bullets here. We had heard, as Laura mentioned, for the need for more specificity. So we added some specific date ranges to milestones that will be included in the roadmap. We are also adding an implementation section. Some of that will be directly in the roadmap itself. Some of that will be in a companion document, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. We've been strengthening the language around ongoing engagement, particularly around environment and wildlife stakeholders and fisheries. We will probably also have, some other means to connect with others, such as from supply chain and workforce on an ongoing basis too. We changed from the numerical order of the objectives because we heard there was some concern about that numerical order indicating some kind of relative importance. So we changed that to alphabetical instead of numerical to de-emphasize that concern about order of importance. And additionally, we included an explicit sentence that notes that all objectives are equally important in the roadmap. So that was in response to that concern. And we also added language to frame the community benefits as investments and opportunities to broaden some of the discussion about compensation or potential impacts on communities and the coast and fishing communities to include benefits and investments and opportunity. So just broaden that framing too. Next slide. We expanded the responsible offshore wind section. So we did have a section that was dedicated to responsible offshore wind in the previous iteration, but we expanded upon that in part to address some of the concerns that we heard about maybe looking at some of the recommendations from the Environment and Wildlife Working Group and the Fisheries Working Group as positive things that could help de-risk investments, but also make sure that offshore wind makes sense for Maine. So we've expanded that section. We've also added some phrases to emphasize labor as a partner in workforce development and supply chain for offshore wind, and included that this really is an all hands on deck moment in this industry. The study that NREL, Business Network for Offshore Wind, and DNV did recently, that was a national assessment of offshore wind supply chain and workforce, found that the US has shortages in all of that to support offshore wind, particularly to reach that 30 gigawatts by 2030. So this is really an all hands on deck moment. We also added some additional language regarding environmental justice and just transition. And we revised the description of the Offshore Wind Ports Advisory Group for clarity, that it is an advisory group and it will be providing advice and feedback to Maine DOT and the Maine Port Authority on plans for offshore wind and ports in Maine. Next slide. And then the roadmap, in public comments, it was suggested that Maine training and education institutes like Maine Maritime Academy are explicitly mentioned for offshore wind training as assets for the state. So we included a specific profile on Maine Maritime Academy as an example, and talked about the role of institutions like Maine Maritime Academy and others in developing workforce in the state of Maine. And we also included listing cable technologies as an opportunity for collaborative research in Maine and in partnerships with other states and other entities. And we added a reference to the importance of centralized access to data that we may be finding from our demonstration and research projects, but also centralized access to non-proprietary data that may result from some of the offshore wind projects. So I think that was it in terms of key revisions. Happy to take any questions or let you take it from here, David.
So I think, thanks, Stephanie. And I think, why don't you walk people through this as well? Because let's look at this, because this is something that's also responsive to what the advisory committee has been signaling, not only in December, but earlier as well.
Yep. Great. So as David's mentioning, several of you on the advisory committee have recommended identifying responsible parties, metrics, and timelines for each action to track implementation of the roadmap. GEO is drafting an implementation chart, which will be available, as I was alluding to before, as a separate or companion document to the roadmap. This is actually a similar approach that the Maine Climate Council took with their implementation chart. And I wanted to share just a couple of example actions in the draft chart to demonstrate what this might look like. So the categories in the chart right now are listing out each strategy, and I included the objective that the strategy supports right underneath it in parentheses. The action, the specific action that is supporting that broader strategy, the lead agency for that action, as well as any additional information. So if there's some existing work that could be expanded upon, or if it's a new initiative, we tried to include some of that information in this column. And then we have a column on metrics, so trying to get at, actually how are we going to measure progress on the roadmap? And there's some suggestions there, and then estimated timeline. So in our milestones graphic for the roadmap, we've broken the timelines, to your point, to specific date ranges. The immediate would be 2023 to 2024. The medium term would be 2025 to 2030, and then the long term would be 2030 plus. So the two examples we included here, one is the strategy to create abundant and equitable opportunities for Maine businesses. The specific action was to continue identifying firms with existing and potential offshore wind market readiness and match with opportunities. The lead agency on this activity is likely the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development in partnership with the Maine International Trade Center. Not to say that GEO wouldn't necessarily have a role in this, but we may not be the lead for this particular action, and we would be supporting. In terms of pieces that we could build upon, we could expand our efforts. We have a Maine Supply Chain Connect registry, which is connected to a national one hosted by the Business Network for Offshore Wind. So we could expand use of that and try to engage more Maine companies in that registry. We can build on the results of the roadmap studies that we've conducted on offshore wind supply chain and partnership building, and also looking at marketing opportunities. We can also build on the efforts that Maine International Trade Center started on offshore wind, and be sure to include the Justice 40 communities and the Island Institute's Waypoint communities. So there's the Justice 40 initiative is a White House initiative to make sure that, and someone can fill in the details here, but to make sure that 40% of federal funds allocated to different programs through the bipartisan infrastructure law and others are going towards communities that need them the most. That's based on a census track, which sometimes loses some of the detail in island communities, for example, for the state of Maine, or smaller coastal communities. So we would probably want to look at some other more refined metrics like the Island Institute's Waypoint communities to identify those and make sure that we are indeed supporting companies and workforce in those communities as well. That would be a pretty immediate timeline action. And then the next row is on advancing opportunities for fair and equitable benefits. This was supporting the action, supporting the objective to support Maine's vital and thriving seafood industries and coastal communities. So there's the action listed there to continue to collaborate and open a dialogue with Maine seafood industries, to identify and implement pathways to help them thrive and explore ways to develop the offshore wind industry to include investments that help support these priorities. The lead agencies on this would probably be GEO in partnership with DMR, based on expanding relationships with fishing communities, fishermen and fisherwomen, and fishing businesses through existing and new mechanisms. Some of the metrics could be included here, again, targeting the communities that would benefit the most, and then estimated timeline would be pretty near term, 2023, 2024. Again, a couple examples of how we might track implementation of the specific actions that we've all laid out together in the roadmap.
Super. All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Very helpful. Last time I checked, this was like a 40-page document. So it's a no joke kind of table. There's a lot of work going into it. Okay. I'm going to drop slides just for a sec, and I'm happy to pull them up if folks want to go back to a specific point. But this was an opportunity for you all to have some, questions or Q&A about what's happened. We're going to talk next about next steps. But before we go to next steps, are there any questions about the way we've been summarizing your feedback from December, the public comment that we got, and the revisions that Stephanie walked us through? Are there any questions about that or how all that's been done? All good? I see some nodding heads. Okay. Any lingering things about content that's bugging folks? Anything else that we need to deal with as an advisory committee when it comes to the content and sort of the guts of the roadmap? Okay. Great. All right. Super. So let's talk about next steps. I think, Dan, you were going to do that, and I can pull up some slides for you. What do we got here?
I think Stephanie was going to cover this part.
Oh, Stephanie. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, Stephanie, if you want to do this.
Yep, sure. Pretty simple. I think we're looking at completing the roadmap in the coming weeks. So targeting that for early February. There's so much good work in here. I'm really excited to finalize this and pull it all together and put it out into the world. The team has worked really hard and really appreciate all your efforts. Ongoing implementation of the roadmap, as we've mentioned in previous meetings, as opportunities arise and as priorities come up from the working groups, we have tried to take advantage of those opportunities and start implementing some pieces of the roadmap. One of which is working on standing up the Maine Offshore Wind Research Consortium that was mentioned, at least by one of the working groups, as important to implement the roadmap. It's also in response to legislation that our bipartisan legislature supported in 2021. So we're looking to stand that up shortly. We are engaging in the BOEM process, as you know, for the Gulf of Maine, informed by the roadmap effort. So much of the work that's happened in putting this roadmap together has been informing our comments to BOEM and our conversations with BOEM. We are developing additional stakeholder engagement opportunities. I think, as we mentioned in some of the earlier slides, we want to continue having these conversations. It's been super valuable to have these teams together to inform the roadmap, and like to continue those conversations as best as we can. And then we would also will be pursuing numerous other priorities over the short term, again, as opportunities arise, such as through the Department of Energy's funding opportunities that are funded through the bipartisan infrastructure law, for example. There are a number of good fits there that might help us implement some of the priorities from the roadmap in the coming short term. And then we'll just ensure continued coordination and communication around the work. So again, really appreciate the engagement from everyone in this process, and we will continue to be communicating through the Offshore Wind newsletter and other mechanisms. And we'll be keeping you up to date on our roadmap progress.
Super. Okay, so those are the next steps. I'll just leave this up for a second. Do folks have any questions about what comes next? Any doubts about the pathway forward or these next steps? All good? Okay. Don't be shy. All right. So that's it for content that we were going to share. And I'll just give one more pause here. If there's anything else from you all that you'd like to sort of transmit as Geo finishes up this work and the writing team and everybody finishes up and gets into this implementation phase. Any final comments from folks here about that? Great. Okay, so we talked about a moment of gratitude. Laura's already kicked it off. I've heard Stephanie as well. You know, Dan, there are some things you wanted to say, and then if others want to chime in too, obviously the chat's a perfectly good place to do that as well. But Dan, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I won't keep us too long, but I did want to, this is kind of the ending of, or the beginning of the end of this process. And obviously this work is going to continue in all the ways that Stephanie just mentioned. But, looking back to July 2021, I'm just really want to acknowledge the commitment and dedication of this group. And, thinking about where we started on Zoom, where folks didn't know each other and hadn't really spent a lot of time together, and kind of where we are now, I think with at least a shared understanding of perspectives and opportunity and needs and data and process. I'm just really grateful for that, and want to acknowledge that. I really want to highlight the work of the working group co-chairs as well. I think that involved a lot of time working through complex issues, and really grateful for the folks that led the 4 working groups and developed the core content of the recommendations. Really grateful. I want to acknowledge the hard work of the agency staff, both within GEO, but across state government, who are helping put pen to paper with the recommendations, and think about all the materials that have been produced, and web content, and just all of that work. And on the private sector side and nonprofit side, just equally grateful. I do want to also acknowledge GEO staff specifically. So Stephanie Watson, Gwyneth Roberts, Ethan Tremblay, and others who really kind of helped this group stay on track and brought so much to it. I want to thank CBI for doing a really terrific job. So David, Laura, Samesh, and the entire team for having these meetings go well, and I think they were organized, well structured, and done in several different locations: Zoom, in person, and in hybrid. And the logistics of that take a lot of work. So thank you to that group. And I think again, if Grog were here, he would have something even more inspiring to say. But I'm just really grateful for his partnership and work on this as well. It's been an 18-month process. As we kind of wrap it up, I just want to end on a note of gratitude and look forward to continuing this conversation and other important venues as we work together on these issues. So that's my note, David.
Thanks, Dan. And we certainly invite others who'd want to weigh in with some thoughts about the last 18 months. On my end, I'd say I really appreciate when state government does public policy development in this way. And I agree with Dan, we're in a very different place than when we started in July. And if you think about how much more we understand each other today versus back then, that's a big improvement. And the public policy as a result of that is wiser and better. So I'm thrilled to be part of that. And thanks for putting up with Laura and me bugging you with emails and everything else. So we're very appreciative of that. Any other final thoughts before we wind up today? Anything else to say?
I just add to Dan's very well covered comments that I haven't been involved in all of the details, but I am reflected back when we were first engaging Laura and thinking especially about Terry and others. Sort of the challenging issues as it relates to the fishing industry are still going to be difficult waters to navigate, but I just really do appreciate Patrice and others staying at the table and engaging. I mean, it's just important that they're here, and I think folks have listened. I think the trip down to Harpswell was excellent, and really, I think it helped build some important bridges and understanding. So just know that these issues aren't easy, but I think David, as you and Dan have both said, I mean, the ability to engage here has made a difference. So just really want to thank those folks especially.
Thanks, Hannah. James?
Yeah, just a quick question about when the document is finished and complete, where will it exist so that the public can have good access? We'd like to share links on our website so people in our community can access it easily. I want to make sure that it's available.
Yeah, I can quickly answer that, which is MaineOffshoreWind.org will be sort of updated and changed to really reflect the roadmap, and that'll be sort of the home. But Stephanie, please correct me if there's something different there, but MaineOffshoreWind.org is going to be a go-to place for the roadmap when it's out.
Yeah, and we'll certainly make sure to share it with everyone. Sorry, Stephanie. And we're working through offshorewind.org or maine.gov/energy and where that ultimately was. We'll absolutely make sure everyone that participated has it and knows where to find it, including all the materials and recorded meetings and all those things too.
Super. Steve, go ahead, please.
I'd just like to commend you, David, and CBI, and commend Stephanie and her team for herding the cats, shepherding it along, and doing an excellent job just getting the business done. I also would like to thank all of the industry people who participated, particularly early on. They all have day jobs. I'd like to thank the state for taking a look at this and remembering that you have a supply chain that's been here for 15 years and will be here after this report is filed away and the next one is started. So remember to pay attention to us. And I think a job well done by all.
Thanks, Steve. Suzanne?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer my thanks as well. I think folks know that a lot of my work is focused on stakeholder engagement processes, and we always sort of say the outcome is only as good as the process that led to it. And I think that the GO team and the CBI team and the working group chairs so much effort. I think that, you know, it was really a chance to take a step forward in how we all engage together at the state level, and a lot of challenges involved, particularly with the pandemic and the remote participation. But I think you all helped us to find ways to make use of the time we had together. But I just want to point out there was so much opportunity to provide feedback in between these meetings. And I really felt like particularly GO was seeking that feedback and would check in and call and offer, you know, what do you think? And to a degree that I personally haven't really experienced before. And I know the working groups had a lot of offline time and needing to connect. And I think that those types of interactions, I think, help build trust and faith that we're all really trying to learn and listen. And I really felt like that was happening through this process, and that folks were willing to do things maybe a little bit differently than how it's been done before. So just kudos for that. And thanks for everybody for taking the extra time on top of these meetings for the work in between. I think that's where the real work gets done sometimes.
Thanks, Suzanne. Meredith?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, similarly, I just want to take a minute to thank particularly Terry again for his amazing leadership, co-chairing the Fisheries Working Group. Terry has an amazing ability to stick his neck out and still earn people's trust. And I'm always amazed by how much of his time he's willing to give. So I really appreciate that. We couldn't have had as good a discussion throughout this process as we've had without him. Likewise, Patrice has been deeply involved in all of these conversations, and they're just not easy for anybody. Ginny and many other members of our group as well. But I also want to take a moment to thank the CBI team, Laura and Pat Field, who isn't here, and David. We also, I think, really benefited from the trust that our working group in particular had with Pat and Laura in that discussion. And I think that was critical to our ability to do the work. So thank you all for that. And finally, again, to all the members, I completely agree with what Suzanne just said. I've had some really I think, deeply trusting and open-minded conversations with many people on this group about things that we don't always agree about. And I really appreciate that engagement, that thoughtfulness from the members of the committee and also from the Governor's Energy Office. So thank you all for that.
Thanks, Meredith. Okay. Anything else to say before we finish up today? Yeah, and one group that hasn't gotten a shout out that really deserves a shout out are folks who've been joining us from our congressional delegation, because Carol Woodcock, Adam Lockman, and others who have been very steady participants and helpful voices. And so Carol and Adam, I see you're both here right now. And thank you for you and the other members of our congressional teams for being there throughout this process and being a steady presence.
Yeah, David, thanks for mentioning that. That was on my list to say as well. It's just incredibly appreciative of the engagement of the federal delegation and support in securing the funding to make this project possible. So thank you to the delegation. Should also note, just there's been a significant public participation, and we have folks on now. So even folks that aren't on the advisory committee, I want to appreciate their engagement.
Yeah, great. And I see Jean Christie out in the audience there as well, and some others, so thanks. Okay, all right, folks, I think we've got to the end of the road on this, although it's the beginning of the roadmap, and we'll be in touch. GO will be in touch. Stay tuned for the actual launch of that roadmap. And as you've seen, Geo would absolutely welcome input from you all. So do not hesitate to pick up the phone, call Stephanie, call Selena, call Dan and others if you've got something going on. So take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Hopefully see many of you tomorrow evening at the Holiday Inn in Portland for the BOEM meeting.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.